Welcome back to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. I'm your host, Ross Stockdale, Thunderstock Marketing, here to bring you a valuable brainstorm to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property. Today's special guest is from a neighboring state, Delaware, Jeremy Jeremy, you're representing one of our favorite new F words, fractional,
Sure.
but a little bit different than a CMO. So, love that. You are a fractional integrator for Catalyst.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about what it's like to be your client's new favorite F word. I love that.
Yeah. It's interesting. The fractional world I didn't even know about till I really got into this. And it's been a wild ride. I've been at it almost 2 years now, working with 4 to 8 clients at a time. And really kind of sitting in that second in command COO/integrator seat. It really gives you a deep view into a company because you're working side by side with the ownership while at the same time turning around and really trying to operationalize that vision and strategy. So, in 2 years, I think 2 years ago when I started this, it was really about how much can I learn as quickly as possible. So, that new favorite F word, fractional, was really my ability to just learn at a super pace, all while, obviously AI was coming into play. So it was using tools as well as just the experience I was going through to learn really fast and then be able to bring that to all clients, no matter the vertical that I'm in.
This season of the Thunderstock Show is all about the EOS life. And for those of you that hear the term fractional integrator, you have to understand that we're tying that back. That's coming out of Gino Wickman's playbook of EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. But unlike a full-time COO and unlike an implementer, fractional integrators are different. And I think for everyone listening to understand that that's like the vocabulary of what we're talking about, super important. But, you didn't start your career as a fractional integrator. You said you're, 2 years in, similar time span for me. I'm 3 years in as a fractional CMO. Didn't really know the fractional CMO was a title until a couple of years ago either, and my question for you is, what was your first step into business? And maybe precursor to that is, what did you expect to do when you were going through school?
Yeah, so I went to school for what was public relations at the time. They actually changed it to strategic communications, which I thought was kind of a euphemism, as public relations can get a bad rap. And I didn't use any of it. I think I was a little cynical for a while just because public relations feels like you're trying to spin things in a sense. So I spent a couple of years really just playing in bands and playing music to, wait tables to make a living. And then one day my parents basically called up and said, hey, we'd love for you to come home and really help the family business. So I immediately at 24 years old got thrown into director of operations type work. For a 24-year-old, that's a lot to take on. But essentially what happened was, 2008 happened. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember opening my parents' new second location in Humboldt.
What business was this?
So automotive. And so they were opening a new location in Humboldt. It was August of 2008.
Humboldt, Delaware?
Humboldt, Pennsylvania, actually.
Really near and dear to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2008, August, they opened the place. We all know what happened in October, November. The market basically crashed. Overnight, basically, my parents' dream of owning a facility that was, essentially going to fund their retirement dreams came crashing down. And so 2012, after I graduated, went off and, had to play in a rock band and live out my dreams for a moment. I came home to help the family business.
What did you play in the rock band? Like, what was that like? That's kind of wild. Like, as someone that did that, got out of their system of living the dream, I was trying to be in the UFC. I feel like the music world of a rock band is pretty darn close equivalent.
Yeah. So I played drums for a decade of my life. I played middle school, high school, college. We made enough money in college that we were like, we're going to Austin, Texas. So I moved there in 2010, playing a mix of, kind of grunge and classic rock mixed together, and did that for a year, which was a ton of fun. Certainly, I think when you come out of college, you kind of live that college life for 4 years and you want to continue it a little bit.
A victory lap, so to speak.
Yeah. So I graduated, with honors, but I wanted the party to keep going, I guess. And, eventually typical, push comes to shove. In a band, it's like a relationship, and the relationship just wasn't working out. So I ended up moving back to North Carolina where I went to school just to kind of live and kind of figure out next steps. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And where did you go to? You went to school in North Carolina, right?
Yep, I went to Elon University.
Okay, you're the second person I've talked to in the podcast this week that went to Elon.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those colleges. I think that they recruited in the Northeast a lot when I was in high school, and then they've just grown substantially in the past 15 years. The place is not recognizable to like when I went there, or at least half of it is.
So, okay, rock band, drummer. I went to a conference. This is going to be a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I have to tell you the story.
Please.
Last month, Sandy Toronto. He
Okay.
played with Cyndi Lauper, was a big person, and there was a couple other like rock bands where he was like their drummer. And now he's in his 70s, and he played professional music from 20s to mid 60s, so like 30, 40 years. And went on tour, and he did tours with Queen and hung out with Freddie Mercury. So like that kind of music probably up your alley, not quite the grunge, but more like the classic rock and roll.
Yeah.
And he was playing a show, and he threw a drumstick to a lady that was sitting in the front row, and made her day. She was in a wheelchair, and maybe just enjoying life. Probably had something wrong, and he wanted to make her day. Her husband stopped him and thanked him. Her husband was a Vistage chair, so if you're familiar with Vistage,
Yeah, absolutely.
and he goes, "I think you should do Vistage speaking circuit." He's like, "What the heck? You're crazy." And since then, he retired from rock, and he's been a Vistage, like a public speaker, and one of the coolest presentations. So if I didn't just have a conference where it was like, this is how rock band drumming translates to business, operational coaching, and like, consulting, I wouldn't get the extreme correlation between what you do, but it makes total sense. And one thing he said for everyone, and Jeremy, that wants to learn more about you, is the drummer is the spinal cord, the backbone of the organization.
Yeah.
And I think the integrator is too.
Yeah, that's a fair point. First off, before we jump into that, I just met with a Vistage chair, Jim Lucas, out of Philadelphia.
That was my first Vistage chair.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked through was the speaker circuit. So he connected me with somebody out of Sussex. I think his name's Brian. I can't remember his last name, but I'm going to meet him in Rehoboth to just understand. He's a motivational speaker, understand that, and like, how do I translate what I've learned through my career from 24 all the way up to now, and I'm 38, and trying to turn that into some sort of like speaking type engagement long term. So the energy is interesting that we're having this conversation.
So Michael Nolan, who will be in your Vistage group, is who got me into both Provisors and Vistage. I know this is off topic of the U.S. journey, but it's kind of on topic.
Yeah.
And that group is awesome. If it wasn't for the fact that I live where I live and the commute, because you're meeting Rehoboth and some of the offsite that aren't in that Malvern area. I'm really putting this Vistage group on blast, but it's worth mentioning.
Sure.
Wonderful Vistage group. And I would say Vistage has been one of the most transformative. Like EOS for me up top.
Yeah.
For my career, transformative. Vistage probably number 2. So I'm very excited. I hope you join. Jim's an awesome guy. U.S. Naval Academy grad. I bet you he remembers who I am. The guy's got a vault for a memory, and great people. So I really am stoked to hear that.
Yeah. It's I think I'm probably going to be considering their trusted advisor group to join that and just network. I think one of the things, and come back to the integrator stuff, is integrators I think really open themselves up to national travel, and it all works out well. But I'm at the point of having a second child here, hopefully in the near future. Not yet, but we're trying, right? And so when that happens, circumstances change. I've got clients out in Seattle, out in LA, out in California, and that's 6 hours. While I love 6 hours of uninterrupted, time to be focused on stuff, it wears long term on stuff. I'm not in my 20s anymore, wanting to live the dream of traveling all over the country. And so I think Vistage really offers the opportunity to just get focused in an area and really build it. And being from Delaware, it's a small state, everybody knows everybody.
Delaware's a small state, but you're connected to the greater Philadelphia area. Maryland's not a nightmare. You could like shoot over to South Jersey, not a big deal. There's a lot of population density in Delaware. I love that, man, we have another commonality. I'm also looking to have the second child, hopefully between 9 to 12, 15 months from now. That's what we're planning. And when I had my first child is when I stopped doing the travel all over the country thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm in the delivery room handling calls, and I'm like, my wife and the nurse are yelling at me, get off the phone, stop working. And I'm like, you're so right. And I'm glad that, it's fun to talk to people with a similar core value of you can still have that impact and live the EOS life. You don't have to but you don't have to sacrifice your time. You can have both your family and the rewarding career.
Yeah, I got into being a fractional integrator because I wanted to live a more purpose-driven life. I was a full-time integrator for a company, and I just wasn't happy at the end of the day. And we were about to have our first kid, and I remember my wife looked me in the eyes and said, "You need to figure your crap out." She might have said it a little more less poetically than that, but it was one of those moments where it was just like, as soon as my daughter was born, it really kind of drove me to find happiness, but also showing up in my core values of like integrity, being open and honest, and really going after something that really fits at my core. Growing up in an entrepreneurial family, helping small to mid-sized business owners is like, at a core, feels like I'm helping my family, and providing a career that helps provide for my family. So it's a very full circle type of career that I've gotten into.
Man, you just said something that hit really close to home, because your start in a business was like so close to my start.
Yeah.
It was, again, I think we're probably pretty similar in age. And the '08 crisis, so your family was auto, my family was in real estate.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Scary bad time, right? Like to have an independent brokerage is not like a major thing. Used to be highly profitable, super doable.
Yeah.
And then the game changed with the recession, and my dad's like, we got to figure something out, and they sold their brokerage and whatnot. And I just remember when I graduated school with a philosophy degree, I never asked myself the question, what am I going to do to make money? Like I ask every other big question about that. Yeah, I was like, that really kind of just missed the thing 6 inches in front of my face come walking down the aisle, graduation. And then he and a very close buddy of mine were telling me that their small business was like in trouble, and like it was just hard, right, during that time in the economy, especially for people that weren't how do I say, like technologically focused.
Yeah.
And a buddy had to drop out of Virginia Tech, and his small business, his family's business, like he had to drop out to help with a small business. We're at a happy hour. He's like, "Hey, have you ever heard of SEO?" I was like, "What's that?" And then we used, between website design, development, SEO, digital marketing, like learning the 3.5x his family business. He got to go back to school. It had the best year ever. Went from regional to international, like hook, line, and sinker. I'm sold. But that feeling of helping someone, not just to increase shareholder value, but be able to go back to school and pursue their dreams and not lose their family legacy. I don't lose that every single time that I come in. So you said helping small business owners as a fractional integrator feels like you're helping your family. Man, I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kind of touch on that story, I mean, at 24, I essentially went home, and it's crazy to think about now, but at 24, I went home to help the family business. They had two businesses, multi-millions of dollars, but one was sucking money out of the other, basically, because you had the one that's been open since 1956, almost going into a third generation, then the new one that was 20 minutes away in Hummelstown. And the economy just crashed, and it was one of those in automotive. If you're an oil change and car wash, people aren't spending money on car washes during an economy crash. And so I went home and basically had to assess everything from credit lines being renegotiated with the credit union, to getting loans restructured, to getting a franchise group to come in and own the operational part of the second property, and then also the family dynamic. You got to get the family home back in one place and feeling like, hey, how do we repair what has left a seriously deep scar on the family? It's at 24 years old, you can't learn that in school. It is felt. I remember this very, very distinctly, having this conversation with my now wife, of a black hole, and I was like, I can't see the light. I said, but I can't give up either. I'm gonna find that light. And eventually we found it, and it was just like so profound of an experience.
You have to get the right band back together.
Yeah, definitely.
Seriously, it's sort of what I'm hearing you say. I mean, it is so profound. The black hole analogy is wild, right? And that's probably one of the reasons that people like you and I were so drawn to EOS, right? Because I think the purpose of EOS is so that you don't have to feel that way.
Yeah.
From an emotional standpoint, right? From a human energy standpoint. It's like you show the light at the end of the tunnel if you do it right.
Yeah, when I got into EOS, the number one thing first, my my mom handed me the book from a local implementer that had given it to her and said, I think you should read this book. I was reading Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. Obviously, my MBA brain was like, oh, I love this textbook. And then I got EOS and I went, it's not that difficult. Like, it's a lot simpler. It doesn't have to be so complex. And I read it. And then, fast forward when I really so obviously I brought in an implementer, Derek Newcomer, out of the Central PA area.
Okay. Yeah.
He brought it to life for the organization I was working with at the time. Did that for about 2 years. And then when I got into the fractional or starting to think, hey, what am I going to do next? The EOS community, they just pull you right in. I mean, I always joke that like in the EOS community, the most cynical person that I met still introduced me to 3 people. Like that's just you don't get that in most circles, and I, there can be pros and cons to all of that, but that is such a huge upside to just feel like you were talking about, you're not alone.
It's crazy to hear that your mom handed you a book and said, I think you should check this out. And then look how much that book handoff altered the course of your career and probably the family business, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Fast forward, family business now, they're in the midst of their EOS life. My parents, I joke that I lived in Fort Lauderdale during the pandemic, and I think that kind of gave them the bug because they ended up buying a place in Myrtle Beach. And my dad is, ready for retirement, I think. And my mom is still actively working in the business. She's been doing it her whole life. But they're living their EOS life. They're going and spending more time in South Carolina each year. My dad loves to golf, so he's getting out and doing that. And, that's EOS life at work. And even as they're dealing with some of the stuff they're going on now, I'm always kind of pulling back to this, like, EOS principles, but also like network. Like if you've got an issue, call people, get people to talk to. And that's all built off of this EOS framework that is like a commonality that people share within the community.
Yeah, everyone's story is different, but there's a hell of a lot more similarities than differences.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, you did the operations thing with the family business. Fast forward through the ups and downs on a roller coaster, living the EOS life, like mission accomplished. Love a good happy ending, which can be just the beginning for some people. But sounds like your father's golf habit will flourish and he'll have a great time.
Sure.
Love to hear that. But how did your mindset and goals change once you were in that and seeing the results to take form and you're out of the black hole? Go from the black hole into what? Like, what was the journey like to get into the fractional integrator, and why'd you choose that?
Yeah, the journey was a little bit of a leap of faith. Going into the fractional space, whether you're working with a firm like ours at Catalyst or you're doing it yourself, you own your own business. So there's risk. You got to jump in with, both hands and feet, jump into the quagmire, and you may make it, you may not. I mean, the statistics are not in your favor. I had owned a previous business during COVID, actually selling disinfectants during COVID, and I did really well, but then it came crashing down because of politics at the end of the day. And so it was scary. But, slowly I got into it. I did a little bit of a side hustle for a while still being full time. And then I jumped, completely in. And what I would say is like, my integrator brain thinks in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, right? Rocks, priorities, what needs to be accomplished. And so every 3 months I brought on 1, maybe 2 clients. And every time I brought on a new client, I would say, what's the new structure that has to exist? Do I need sticky notes, app on my phone? Okay, cool. Now that I have a new client, do I need to go to a Monday board to be able to keep all of my tasks in one place? All right, I just hired an EA and I'm full of clients. Like, how do I communicate properly with her so that she understands what I'm working on and not just what I'm working on? And so it's been like an evolution of how do I continuously improve and really start kind of building the foundations of a business. At this point, I have an EA I work with. I love her. Her name's Sarah. I've got a bookkeeper. I've got a CPA. These are all people that, I'm working with to help me bring my business to life.
Jeremy, you said a couple of things that it sounds like if you're watching the movie Step Brothers, we just become best friends. Like,
we did.
I'm like looking in the mirror because the same thing, man, in the journey. It's like, I had to find the right people in the right seats to
Yeah.
delegate and elevate so that I could actually use my time better.
Yeah.
And I just hired a bookkeeper. I just hired a CPA. I just hired an EA, like same as you. And it's been like, I don't know what I was doing before I did that.
A lot.
Too
Probably
much
too much.
of things I stunk at.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been a big thing for me. I've had to transition bookkeepers this year. And just realizing that, like, even in that scenario, I trusted a bookkeeper to do something that wasn't being done the way that I expected it to be done. And that's on me. Like, I hired that person to do it. And so, but that was great experience to say what I'm looking for in the future. And when I found that right person for the seat, I mean, night and day, the difference. So it's, I'm feeling a lot more secure around my finances and accounting going into this year, given what happened last year with the wrong person, right seat.
Same thing, exactly same story for my business. And when I found this CPA, maybe not CPA, but she's like a tax accountant.
Sure.
So the person that goes in between the bookkeeper and the tax person, who does more like not fractional CFO, but like fractional staff accountant controller.
Yeah.
And she's the one who told me that my old bookkeeper, she just ripped it apart. Like, here's all the things that are wrong. And it's like, that's what EOS, I think, does for businesses on a bigger scale, is like you identify what is the root cause behind your pain. You might not, if you can't identify the source of the trauma, how do you expect to fix it?
Yeah.
And finding that person that could do it on my blind spots was probably same for you. Like, that was the first step in making it, no longer drop down the issues list every week.
Yeah, two things come up for me there. The first one is, gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. Oh, the simple but not easy framework. The not easy is confronting the obstacle in the way, right? So Ryan Holiday, stoic, you got to go right at it. And not saying that you don't do that with, a little bit of emotional intelligence or some grace and empathy, but you also have what you need to be done. And if it's not being done, you have to IDS that down to a solution that makes sense at the end of the day. But yeah, and then the other thing that I was thinking about, you know what? I'm drawing a blank on it, so it'll come back around.
We'll talk about the Stoic philosophy that you just said. Love Ryan Holiday, Daily Stoic, one of my favorites. Talk to Jim Lucas about James Stockdale. Obviously, James has a bit of we have the same last name. Someone asked me yesterday, are you related? It's my grandfather's cousin. They were all U.S. Naval Academy grads, and they're all farmer Stockdales out in the Midwest here and there, and fighter pilots and whatnot. But anyway, same. It's retain faith that you'll prevail in the end regardless of difficulties, while at the same time confronting the most brutal facts of your current reality. It's like you can be an optimist, but also be a realist, and you should be at the same time. And I think that is the essence of what Stoicism can really impart upon with leadership, right? It's like, hey, we're going to confront the problem. It's going to be hard, but hard is how you make it easy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'll tell you, their stoicism, I think I used to always call myself a cynical realist, or a realist. Yeah. And people would be like, no, you're just cynical, because I would tend towards the negative. But like, I think it's important to like be realistic about what you can and cannot control. And sometimes that may make you feel a certain negativity towards the situation. It's human emotion at the end of the day. What matters is that you don't act in human emotion. You act in terms of like what your, the greater good and positive intention of your behaviors at the end of the day. And I've been leaning into, kind of stoic philosophy a lot lately, just in terms of networking and getting out there and meeting people, because I have ambitions to grow as a company.
Self-awareness, knowing what you can and can't control. One thing that is a component of self-awareness and EOS is you got to take the Kolbe, the quantitative test. And it's like, what is an EOS implementer said this to me earlier, and I had to share it with you. When you think of GWC, get it, one that has capacity, that's, it's got to be a yes.
Yep.
For a people analyzer. And for those that don't know the EOS language, what we're trying to do is analyze, the accountability, the org chart of an organization to say, is this person the right fit? And is this the right seat for that person based off of core values and competencies? Back to Kolbe. Using these assessments, he goes, you can think of GWC, C being an IQ test or a Wonderlic test. Do they have the capacity? What IQ is required for the job, right? Could be your DISC, it could be your Myers-Briggs, it could be however people feel about situations and what their tendencies are in that respect. But then he goes with the G, he goes, the only test we found is Kolbe. And that's what's their DNA lend them towards. and did a little bit of research on you, Jeremy, for your Colby.
Yeah.
Luckily you have it right in your headline, your
Made it
LinkedIn.
real difficult.
Made a real, yeah, it was quick research. So you're a 7274,
Yeah.
and I am where the heck did I put this? I'm an 8471. And for those of you that don't understand, that's fine. You don't really need to know the nuance of Colby. But one thing that is super fascinating to me is we've got a pretty similar,
Colby.
pretty similar like gram, if you will, like the trend line, if you will, in Colby. But you're an integrator and I'm a visionary. So that one number that's dissimilar is, I think, a difference between being the integrator and visionary. There's a lot of commonalities. Anyway, had to share that. And
yeah,
how is Colby and being aware of your GWC affected your decision in your career?
Yeah, so two things along those lines, and hopefully I remember them both this time. So I'll say strategic and operational for like the spectrum of integrator, but then also just me and how I show up in my career. A 7274 is highly visionary. So you were correct in stating that, we're both have visionary tendencies, lots of ideas. We'll go deep down the rabbit hole. The follow through might be a little lacking at the end of the day, which is where integrators typically come through. The integrator seat, I think some of it's my life experience of like at 24, I wasn't sitting at the bottom rung of a company. I was trying to figure out a family issue that could have cost us everything at the end of the day. And so to me, an integrator, like if you get to that COO integrator level in life, you got to show up and be responsible. You got to do what you need to do. You got to say what you're going to do and then do it and follow through on it. So I think that there's a certain level of like just, jobs in any country, any part of the world, like if you don't show up responsibly, you're not going to keep that job at the end of the day. In fact, as an integrator, it's my job to say, are you doing the job at the end of the day? The GWC of it. Do you have the capacity to do the job? And so I became an integrator because I showed up, and was responsible for the things that I was meant to do. And I tried my best to, at the very least, meet, but most often exceed what the expectations were for that role. And so when it came to being an integrator, I was already doing it. I had been doing it most of my career at that point in several high level positions within organizations. So it was really easy for me to step into that. Now to my second point, there's the spectrum of like an integrator, right? There's like the operational side. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and do all the day in, day out type of stuff. A lot of times that'll be a full-time integrator doing that because they're there to help handle whatever needs to be handled. And in a small to mid-sized business, that could be owning the P&L down to making sure the trash gets taken out at the end of the day or fixing the HVAC system. So there's that. And then there's the strategic side. So the part that I really love about being an integrator is being a thought partner for visionaries, because it is a lonely position at the top. And if you're not in a group that you most likely are paying for of other entrepreneurs that just is feeding into you a lot
like
of
Vistage
things, like Vistage, then you're just in your head. And I don't know if you've ever read The Untethered Soul, but a lot of times they talk about this concept of the person in your head is the person you talk to the most. And if they were a person next to you sitting on the couch just telling you negative stuff about yourself all the time, would you hang out with that person? And so they talk about that as a concept. And so I like being that for visionaries of like, I'm here, I'm not your employee, I'm not getting benefits, I'm here to help you think through what you're going through, to say, does that make sense? Does that not make sense? And help filter down what needs to be heard to the company. And what do you need to like let go as a visionary, as well as what do you need to do next steps of the money coming into your business? How are you making sure you're paying yourself? A lot of these things you can't share with employees within companies. And so I kind of fit into that more strategic type of integrator, thinking high level of the company, and then using delegate and elevate to make sure that there's a team in place to help deal with, some of the more operational side of things.
Everything you just said, love. And I need to read The Untethered Soul. Sounds like right up my alley. One of the things that I'm going to tie back to Colby and your experience, I have a few friends and colleagues through Vistage that do Colby consulting and coaching.
Yeah.
And I have an integrator in my business. So I have the EA and the bookkeeper, but I have an integrator that really helps me to keep the guardrails on and keep my head within my ears, right? Instead of just going all over the place as a visionary, I tend to have that tendency, like you said. And his Colby is a 7365. which is like a point off on everything of yours with a similar trend line as yours. And I'm like, I have, he'll listen to this podcast, and I'm just so happy that like I made that decision, because he gives me strategic feedback that's like kind but honest, and it's both direct, right? Radical candor. It's like cares personally, challenges directly. And I think that's what you get to do, because a lot of people that aren't fractional, like what we do, fractional trust advisors, they always have in the back of their head, will this keep me getting my 401k paid for, my medical benefits, and my salary?
Yeah.
Whereas when you're like us, you're like, hey, how will this impact the client result, which is what I ultimately care about as a trusted advisor? And they're usually misaligned incentives, not always, but sometimes. Like, I know that the nature of my thing is transient. Like, I'm not going to be there forever. I'm not there full time. So I'm more likely to give the open and honest feedback to clients, which they probably can benefit more than if I was involved in any sort of office politic or bureaucracy to try and just, fit in and get along. So wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just recently, actually, two things. One, I was not always, when I first started, I definitely was like scarcity mindset, a little bit of getting up to speed and really thinking, can I do this? But now that I'm here and I've had this conversation with fellow colleagues at Catalyst, just having that abundant mindset of like, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? They could fire me. Okay, so now if I lose a client, okay, that would suck. Yes, certainly it has a fiscal hit for a month or two. But at the same time, now I can shape, knowing that won't hurt so bad, I can now say, what's the best possible thing that could happen by saying this? That I'm the one person in the company that brings it up, that allows us to address it and come to a real solution that makes it go away forever. I'm in. Let's do it.
Yeah, I think you've got to love the idea of winning what good looks like more than you've got to fear or hate the idea of losing. And as someone that was into sports, it was tough when I was younger, because I really had a scarcity mindset of, I have to win or I can't lose this. And I was more focused on the outcome than the input. So anti-stoic, a lot of like the sports psychology. And there's probably some element to that with music, right? Like you can't necessarily tell the lead singer or lead guitarist that they stunk, or else maybe now you're going to be politically in trouble. I'm assuming that would be a potential dynamic.
Yeah.
But boy, oh boy, the results took care of themselves when I just stopped worrying about them.
Yeah. It's an interesting dynamic. I mean, well, and worry is a human construct of like a mind. Basically, it's not reality. I was just thinking about that, listening to the obstacles the way working out yesterday. Is like fear, man. It's a hell of a motivator, but it isn't tangible. It's not real, and it's usually fear is an unknown future state that you're concerned about. And so, my wife and I, we both have dealt with anxiety at certain points in our careers. And when I embraced that, and I said, the number one thing is if I wake up and I'm like fearful or anxious, I get up and just start doing whatever I'm fearful or anxious about. And that pulls me out of it. So I take the Stoic philosophy of I can control my actions right now and get this done. I'm willing to sacrifice a little sleep to get a little bit of things done to feel better.
To get better sleep, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, exactly.
I love what you said about fear not being real and it being a transient thing of the mind. I've always learned, I think my brother taught me this, that worry is just misuse of the imagination. Wow. Right? So if you identify that I'm worrying about something, it's like, well, I'm trying to treat a hammer like a screwdriver and I'm misusing the tool of fear. And if you use it like a propellant or a motivator to just identify and act on the thing that's causing you the distress, like it can be powerful. I liken it like caffeine or coffee, right? Like you can't have all of your energy come from a stimulant, but sometimes it's really helpful to get through stuff you don't want to do.
Totally.
But then the opposite side of hope, or hope is not the word I'm looking for, but the optimism is more like, do you have a well-balanced diet with an exercise routine and a sleep schedule? It's like sustainable, positive, nourishing, but you can still be a bodybuilder and have plenty of caffeine, but use the fear as a right source of fuel. For whatever reason, never thought of it that way before. So I talked to you. You can keep that.
Yeah. Well, listen, I never thought about fear till I heard, a boss that I had when I worked in financial accounting consulting. And he said, fear is a hell of a motivator. And I was like, man, for me seeing that I can have cynical tendencies, I was like, that's pretty cynical. But like the older I get, I'm like, no, actually, it can be a really positive thing. And much like caffeine to wake you up in the morning, fear can help you do positive things as long as you don't let it just pull you down.
I want to switch back to similar but different on the topic. One of the key milestones that we've discussed offline was that you helped a client go from a minus 300,000 to 600,000 in profit in 3 months. I'll tell you, I helped a client go from minus 550K to plus 40K in 9. And I was like, that's a pretty cool story. Then I hear yours. I'm like, all right, you got to tell me that story. I want to hear all about that, because you talk about a fear mindset to transform into positive in a quarter.
Yeah. And I know Marvin would have no problem with me telling this story, so I won't even hold back on it. It was in wealth management at the time when interest rates were high, and there was a lot of insurance that he had that was just, lower percentage returns. And so it created this opportunity to be able to take his assets under management and just flip them fast. And when I came in, my job right away is to talk to the owner about what's going on in the business and then build trust with the team. And it was pretty apparent early on that there was a lack of trust with one person on the team sitting in the sales seat. And, by removing, basically I had a conversation to say, okay, if you've got this opportunity that you're telling me about, you've got all of this potential to reach out to, it was essentially 330 million of AUM that they could go after, and nobody was doing it. So there was just people sitting in the seat, not taking advantage of the opportunity. And so I said, okay, well, I hear you. I hear what your team is saying. Take this person off of the leadership team to increase the psychological safety of the leadership team. Tell them what we're about to do, because we're turning it on. And then we took the rising stars that were coming up in the insurance game that he had. When I say game, but in the insurance business. And I said, train them. They can be ready to go in a month. And so they showed up at 6 a.m. every day to train from 6 to 8 a.m. to learn it, and just started picking up the phone. And it was an easy, hey, you have this, I can get you this. And it was like, here's $10, you could make $50 type of scenario. And I might be exaggerating, but in a matter of what they could do in a year, they turned I think it was a third of it, of the AUM in 3 months. And so it was one of those, like, the way that Marvin explains it was a conversation of an idea that already existed, a dynamic that needed to change, and we just put the two together, and it was lights out. And so that was how we were able to do that in such a short amount of time. It was nuts. It was, 60 to 80 hour weeks for the operational team, but it changed everything overnight.
Yeah, I would work my butt off for 60, 80 hours a week if I knew that the rest of the 9, I could sleep well at night, right? Yeah. And I think EOS at the core is managing and directing human energy. And you took the fear of failure and you just used it as a rocket fuel for this organization. In 90 days, they don't have the fear of failure anymore. This problem goes away, right? That's the goal. That's the input to get the output of the EOS life.
Yeah. I think when I'm an old man and senile, I will tell this story to my kids. But I remember getting off of an airplane, waiting to be picked up, and I get a call from Marvin, and his sister Octavia, calls in, and he goes, "Hey, I just need to let you know, like, it's Friday night. We just closed 30 million this week of policies being replaced, essentially." And I was like, "That is awesome!" Like, that feeling. It's like, the way that I liken it is, in the book EOS, they talk about, if you don't have sales coming in, you have operations sitting around. That stagnation feels terrible. But it's really awesome when you have the good problem of money coming in, and you got to figure out your systems on the fly, but it's a good problem to have. And it was, to be able to just turn that scenario on its head, it's a great feeling, because essentially they're good problems to have at the end of the day.
Quick story about that, because it's such an interesting, the way you frame it is just such a refreshing frame. I want to create problems for my clients. And what I mean by that is I want them to have so much leads coming in that they're either constrained by sales to handle and close them, or constrained by operations to fulfill them. And I have a few clients, one in particular, that I created that problem for. And I'm happy to be the bad guy in that situation, because then it's like, what better feeling than being like, oh boy, Ross, like lay off the marketing. Like we've got too many leads. Actually, can you market to get us new employees? Like that's a fun way as a trusted advisor to be the bad guy, but the good guy, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love for you to tell me though, like you go in and you create that type of positive problem, right? We're bringing leads in that we so much that we don't know how to handle it. Do you ruffle feathers along the way of a team that might be dealing with not all A plus players? Have you ever had that scenario?
It was worse when I was younger. And I'll tell you why. Because I didn't learn humility really until I became a dad. So I've got a 3-year-old. So it probably learned that lesson a little later than I should have. But I used to be really proud of the accomplishments and incredibly competitive and want to be the ace and rock every scorecard and every rock and like, look how good I'm doing. And then it had like an inverse effect where it was like, yeah, I might be getting the business result, but like I'm not winning trust because I ruffled feathers or I was maybe braggadocious or perceived as arrogance. Or I didn't think I was arrogant. I just thought I was, maybe outworking my insecurity at the time.
Yeah.
And then when I started thinking about humility in the lens that like I'm not the center of like the things that I do, and it's about how do I help other people. It's
Sure.
easy to do when you have kids. You have at least one kid. Like you know what it's like when they want something. It's like my attention goes on you. It's not about what I want you to do. It's how do I nurture this relationship so that you can grow up and learn the lessons and not be like a child forever. So I think that the answer is I just try to frame everything that I do, whether it's like if I have an input that's positive that positively impacts, as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Always,
That's great.
always. So I try to have the mindset, and I work at it every day. Of I'm going to think so much about how awesome the teams are when they're rewarding so hard positively, and when somebody does something right, that like high tide raises all ships is how I always try to approach it.
Sure.
That was not tangible, but in reality, I can tell more horror stories than I can positive ones, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's such an interesting frame. What about you? Like, how do you approach the trust dynamic? Jeremy, is our goal is to make exponential change, not just like predictable linear. If I don't want a company to grow by 3% every year, you're not even matching inflation at that point. But when you do get exponential change, how do you manage the relationships and not have people lose trust or get defensive? Because at the core of the leadership, it's open and honest, and there's trust as the base. Patrick Lencioni, I'm sure you've read, and it's a lot of the fables in that come from people trying to hide or cast blame or make excuses for poor results and poor behavior. But then there's like, what if you're doing a good job? And I don't say I always do a good job, but sometimes I have. And how do you still keep trust with the other members of the team so that they don't become mistrustful of you? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, I'm going to relate this to my experience this past quarter. I have had to put people on performance improvement plans and or let go of people a lot this quarter, and there's just no getting around it. It's what I'm hired to do. It's the not fun part of the job, but everybody has that. So the way that I listen at the core of EOS, you as a business and as an individual that owns a business, you're going to change. And so if you're hiring somebody like a fractional in any department, you're looking for change. So I expect there's going to be a ruffling of feathers. Now, I don't go in guns a-blazing like I would have, like you, younger, and just say, how many tables can I overturn, essentially. But at the same time, I know that might happen. So I go in with a open and honest, very direct type of candor with people to develop relationships early on. The flip side of that is that it also allows me to start understanding what are people's motivations. And so you start to see how people are motivated. And so when I go into an organization, I'm expecting that not everybody's going to stay. It's a part of the change. The reason you're stagnant is because you've got some people that might be resting on their laurels. They did something good, but now they're just sitting back, or they just are not the right person. So I'm being hired to help figure that out. So I expect it. So I think at the end of the day, mistrust can be motivated by selfishness or the kind of thinking that I'm carelessly holding the responsibility of the entire company in my hands. And so in those two dynamics, I come to the full picture that I've realized this quarter of the sum is greater than
The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
The
That's what you're
whole
trying to
is
say.
greater than the sum of its part, and so in that scenario, I liken it like this: if we have to let somebody go, and I'll take the worst example that you have to deal with, a teddy bear in the organization, super awesome, you love him, he's a great person, he's just not a right fit here, type of scenario. When that happens, you literally have to go, I have one person, one family, one paycheck that I have to really let go. We've tried per the EOS system to get them into the place where they can improve. They're not. But if I don't do this, it sacrifices 20 other people's paychecks, their individual lives, and their family. And now I have to think about the greater good of the company and not the individual. And that's helped me kind of frame how I go about it and grow in that dynamic.
You know what? You manage human energy by leading with empathy, because what you say, when you understand their motivations, then it's a lot easier to say, hey, this is how the change must be. You're either going to be motivated or willing to go with the change and follow the PIP and get better, or we care about you, but we care about the companies more. And I think doing both is fair and the right thing. Real quick story, one you just shared, the hardest and most correct term I've had to do was, there was someone who was supposed to be the integrator in a company that I worked with, and they accepted the task to renew the benefits package for the whole company. Right, it was renewal time. Yeah, all you have to do is just make sure the paperwork is done, submitted, signed. Like, I don't know that all that goes into it. I was crazy visionary, but like, that person took the responsibility. The day before renewal, the broker comes back and is like, hey, we didn't get any of your stuff, and like, you got 24 hours or else there's gonna be a lapse in benefits.
Wow.
And he lied to me.
Oh yeah.
And I had to let him go. And the guy goes, well, what about my family? I was going to retire here. And what about my severance? Do I get a year of severance? And I'm like, you can be so selfish looking at me, defending yourself, and let 50 people not have health benefits. Like, I didn't have, like, that was the number one term where I was like, you know what? I have to do this, or else it gets worse over time.
Yeah.
I couldn't sleep if people that were just had a baby would go into the hospital and be like, oh, you don't have health insurance. And they're like, what? What does that say to the rest of the company? So that's an extreme example, but it makes sense the way that you're framing doing the hard part. It's like, look, it's for the greater good.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a concept I'd love to know your thoughts on too. I've come to realize, obviously the idea of the grass is not always greener on the other side. When you have to pull a wrong person out of your company, the grass is typically greener on the other side. And having been through that repetition so often, you start to realize, once you let that wrong person go, all the things that have been covered up. And then you can start to really fix the issues. So EOS allows you the opportunity to deal with the people issue, to then deal with the operational issues that come with that person being the wrong person, wrong fit for the company. And that has been an eye-opener for me. I mean, I did it when I was with my family's company. Now I do it more often as a fractional, because I work with a bunch of different companies. And I really firmly believe that some of my ability is to say, I'm telling you, if you're feeling this way, you've gotten to this point of no return, make the decision and let's talk tomorrow, because you're going to start to realize all of the things that have been kind of sitting on the sidelines that are issues that need to be resolved.
Dude, the grass is greener when the conditions for green grass are met. Grass doesn't care how hard you try to make it green. It doesn't care how much you hope and want it to and are pulling for it and rooting for it. It only cares is, are the conditions for green grass met, yes or no? And that might sound like hyperbolic and logical, but the same thing applies to a rock band, where if you had the world's best opera singer in your grunge band, it might be a great singer, but terrible conditions being met for your band to be successful. No one's going for an opera singer. That doesn't make any sense with the songs you're playing. Same thing with an MMA team. I'll tell you what, the number one way I improved my athletic performance is I stopped partying. I could have done everything right in the gym, could have eaten the right things, but if you're going out to happy hour on Friday instead of training and dieting, you're gonna suck.
Yeah.
It's conditional. It goes back to this philosophical concept that I learned from a professor of relational block world, that nothing exists in a vacuum. It only exists in relation to everything. Again, whole is greater than some of its parts.
Totally.
a part is just like you look at the accounting and finance, like, you can't just isolate the P&L and say the P&L, we're not profitable and the loss of profit's the problem. No, you got to look at what are the line items that compose that and fix the cancerous ones.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. You're bringing up now we're getting the personal side of stuff, which I think if your personal life isn't right, it seeps into your professional life. This year I gave up alcohol and just stopped. I was pushing 200 pounds. I was, getting dad bod like crazy, getting super lazy, and I just wasn't showing up as effective as I could in all aspects of my life. I think we're 5 months into the year. I'm down 13 pounds, super in shape. My anxiety's gone, and I'm just mentally clear. Like, I'm able to just turn on the dime. In the fractional world, you got to be able to deal with multiple businesses at once. It's really started to turn into me writing out like why I keep coming back to this, like how, like, feeding into my personal life positive habits that show up in all aspects of my life. And I think I'm actually going to write a book and title it The Undiagnosed Addict, and it'd be like the confessions of a for-hire COO. Like, like, how's my crazy visionary brain work? And then what do I see in my work as a COO? And how can that translate to entrepreneurs? Because I think entrepreneurs have those tendencies, and at least a large portion of them. And I continue to try to improve every day in those aspects. And alcohol is just one of those things that it's a condition, like you were talking about. Like, am I going to do it or not do it? And how does that feed into my life?
And if you identify that, at least for a period of time, that there's like having no relationship with alcohol is the healthy relationship, that's just self-care. Like, that's just like the truth. Like, you're being honest. I found that, it's crazy when you make that parallel, because one of the keys that I found is that the people that you surround yourself with, you become, the average of the five closest people or not. And really, most importantly, it should be your like wife or partner.
Yeah.
And I look at it like my wife is so hardworking, so ambitious, super high standards of excellence, and like I've become better in every shape of my life. But physical shape, like you said, you've lost 13 pounds this year. I don't know how tall you are, but for anyone that's at 200 to go to a sustainable 187 in 3 months, probably the right method, right? If you would have lost 40 pounds in 3 months, I'd be like, Jeremy, fucking pump the brakes, brother. Like,
Yeah.
but to say that is, my wife was seeing an anti-aging doctor. Think of it more like not a competitor to a general physician, but someone who was more about like, how do you age gracefully? And we do blood work, and they measure your height, weight, body fat percentage, like liver, cholesterol, blood panel,
Yeah.
hormones, all the things that really take your quality of life as you get older. And when I first started seeing him, I was like 227 pounds. I'm 5'8", so I don't know how tall you are. You're probably taller than me. I'm 5'8".
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I work out 3 to 4 times a week, and I thought that would be the only condition I would have to meet to be healthy. He's like, nope. It's
No.
like, your stuff is terrible. And then I've lost 30 pounds, and I've went from 23.7% body fat to 15.6,
Wow.
and but sustainably over the course of 2 years. So consistency.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the exponential impact on my relationship with my family and my wife, and my business success, is a higher trend line. It's been better than just the body fat. And I think what you said, though, is like that holistic approach between if your house is not in order, your health's not in order. If you're not trying to get the whole U.S. life in order at the same time, like, it's more than just rocks and scorecard.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people will have like a personal scorecard that they keep, or a personal VTO of what they're looking for. And I did all of that blood work here probably 2 months ago, and what's cool is that I've gotten to this level. But I went to the doctor, and I have no problem admitting my LDL is high, and she said, "Hey, your cholesterol is high." We talked through it, and she said, "At your point, I would typically put people on statins." And I said, "All right, doc. Well, you saw I dropped 13 pounds. You see that I have this consistency. What level, 1 to 10, are you comfortable with me not doing that and really sticking close to my diet as the next rock that I'm focused on?" And she goes, "I'm an 8 out of 10 because all of your other blood work, her words, are immaculate." And I was like, "Did you just call my blood work beautiful?" I was like, "That's awesome." Like, not your LDLs, but yeah. So it's cool because once you get to that level, you just start thinking about what's next. And listen. Now I'm just hyper aware of the things that I need to be focused on as I get older.
So It's a theory of constraints, though, right? And that's what EOS does, right? You mentioned Vern harness and scaling up earlier, and I worked with a business partner that our ambition was to grow from 0 to like 1 billion in 20 years, which was a great thing. We grew from 0 to 10 million in 3 years, and that was like real exponential. And now I think the company's maybe triple that. I don't know, something like that. So that's another 3 years. But we had a conversation about, should we use EOS or scaling up? And I said we should use EOS. We've got between 5 and 250, 500 employees. We're a small business. Like, it's a simple framework. We can adopt it. He's like, yeah, but we're going to be a big business, so we should use scaling up. And we had this thing, and I'm like, scaling up, right? You said was a textbook and it's complicated. But I think, not to say that I was right, he was wrong, but I think that for who I like to work with, it's EOS, and it's because at that time, it's meeting you where you're at. And it helps you to identify simply what are the constraints. Because I love the theory of constraints in business. It's like you will only grow to where your constraint allows you to grow to. And you just keep whittling away. Like you said, okay, I'm going to eliminate alcohol. Now I'm going to improve my diet. And it's like, then you check in, whether it's quarterly or however long, and you identify, okay, what's the next constraint?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You're bringing up a good point, and I might go a little bit away from theory of constraints, but I was just talking with a prospect the other day, and you get the question often, are you EOS pure? And like, while listening to the conversation, one of the things I heard was they're not, and they're struggling with a lot right now, and it helped me realize that like EOS pure, like an operating system, you need to operate on one operating system and keep that. But in the business and professional development world, there are so many complementary things that like you do not need to have two different types of scorecards or call rocks priorities and priorities rocks. Simple language can confuse people. So you have to be very strict about like, hey, they're rocks. But beyond that, there are tools that Strategic Coach has built out. Vern Harnish with scaling up has certain tools that, as long as they're not conflicting with the operating system itself, can help really elevate. And one of the things I think about is when I first go into an organization, I do an activity inventory with everybody. That is a strategic coach concept. Mm-hmm. What are you doing daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? And then you pull in the EOS aspect of love it, like it, dislike it, hate it. And you start to say, how do we build a job that you love and delegate the rest? So delegate and elevate, right? And so there's tools that can be used. Another example I'll give is just Strategic Coach Experience Transformer. You throw an event. The event doesn't go well. You get back together the next day and you say, what worked, what didn't work, how are we going to do it differently next time? But it's a tool that helps you with questions to think through all the aspects of the pros and cons of it, and how do you move forward going, or how do you go moving forward, make sure that doesn't happen the same way again. So your continuous improvement. And so I think EOS Pure is absolutely like, you have to model a certain operating system and get really comfortable with it. Much like you would go to the gym and follow a strict plan. If you start throwing in a bunch of different stuff, you might injure yourself along the way. And so I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that there are elements within this business and professional development world that can be layered into the operating system, but you got to stick to one operating system as a company.
I'm going to do my best to answer that concisely, because I could go talk 20 more minutes with you, Jeremy, but I'm looking at the clock and I don't have 20 more left. I've got a couple. And I think that you hit home on something that was so important. If I asked you, Jeremy, did you play sports growing up, or what physical activities in your past did you like the most? Like, what's your answer?
Yeah, volleyball.
Perfect. And if I was to coach you on how to lose weight, I would say you should probably play more volleyball, right? Because there's a high likelihood that if you love it, you'll probably keep doing it. So whatever the plan is for a business, just like do the one that makes the most sense for you. Right? I love EOS, so I push it. Same probably for you. But like if I have a client that does OKRs, okay, great. As long as we stick with that instead of switching and making some Frankenstein system, sure. The consistency is what matters, right? Like I have friends that are triathletes. Well, I like to lift weights. Okay. So I'm not going to be like you, but hey, let's be competitive in how consistent we can be. And I think that's what you're saying too, because that's when compound interest happens. Is when you stick to a plan and see it through till its completion, versus like one of my biggest pet peeves in EOS is, hey, we set the rocks at the quarterly meeting. 30 days later, I don't like these rocks. We're going to switch them again. That's not the point of rocks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it's the human tendency to want to move the goalpost at the end of the day. And listen, that's not to say that rocks can't change, but like we need to IDS the changing of the rocks to make sure that we truly agree. And is that aligned with our 1 year goal? And so you lock it back in to the tools of the operating system at the end of the day to make sure that you're not headed towards your North Star and decide, you know what, we're going to go south now. So
No, couldn't agree more. I could talk to you for a long time, Jeremy. This has been a major pleasure, but I need to do this new trend I really like, which is I'm going to ask you to give a question to the next guest. You don't know who it is. What would you like to ask the next guest that I interview? Anything.
that is a good question. I two questions, if that's okay. What drives you, and are you setting aside time for creativity?
Okay, I'll make sure to ask the next guest. But now the fun begins for me. The question that my last guest asked for you,
Sure.
not knowing who you would be. What are you doing today that will change someone's life trajectory tomorrow?
What am I doing today that will change?
Other than this podcast, that doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I am going to keep this real close to the family. Tonight, my wife has something after work, so I'm going to pick up my daughter, and I'm just going to take her to the park and just run the dog, let her run around crazy, and have a good time. And as a father of a 3-year-old like you, I truly believe in making those moments for my daughter, especially as she's at an age where she is sharp as a tack and she remembers everything. And so how I show up for her impacts her life, and I see it, and I am critically thinking about how I can continue to shape that for the positive.
I think everyone listening that has a young child at home, that's what good looks like for an answer to that question. So,
Well, thank you. I could get teary-eyed talking about my daughter. She might drive me crazy, but I love her to death.
well, Jeremy, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you on this show. For everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you take one of the many stories and thoughts we've had and just take one and hopefully improve your life with it. And if you like the conversation, I don't run any ads in the show. Don't plan to. I just ask that you share it with a friend. It only grows by word of mouth. Until next time, go play with your daughter or go make a positive impact in somebody else's life. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross.